In the New Mexico desert, a police officer rounded a quiet road and saw something that did not belong to the landscape. Minutes later, he was staring at a silver shape on the ground, and the question became simple: what had just landed there? This happened near Socorro in 1964, when the region was still a hard, open stretch of highway and scrubland. The setting matters because there was nowhere for a strange object to hide and nowhere for a witness to mistake it for the ordinary. Lonnie Zamora was not a thrill-seeker or a self-appointed contactee. He was a local police officer on duty. That detail gave the account immediate weight because he was trained to observe, report, and stay calm under pressure. He first noticed a roaring sound overhead and a bright object moving low across the sky. What he described was not a distant star or a drifting light, but something close enough to demand an immediate turn in the road. As he followed the sound, the object seemed to descend beyond a rise in the terrain. Then, in the stillness that followed, he saw what looked like a metallic craft sitting in a shallow ravine with two small figures or shapes nearby. The scene, he reported, was brief, but it was packed with details that stayed with him for years. He remembered a polished, egg-like body, a strange insignia on its side, and the sense that the craft was not built for anything familiar. Then came the sound he could not ignore, a deep mechanical roar, followed by a rising blast. The object lifted away so quickly that he had to shield his face from dust and heat, as if the ground itself had been kicked awake. When the dust settled, the place looked altered, almost staged by something that had no interest in being understood. There were scorched patches, flattened vegetation, and impressions in the earth that suggested weight, contact, and sudden departure. Zamora did what a careful officer would do. He reported the incident immediately. That quick report matters because it places the story in the realm of field testimony, not a memory polished by weeks of rumor. Investigators arrived to inspect the site, and they found physical traces that kept the case alive. The ground showed disturbance, the brush showed heat damage, and the location itself became part of the evidence. What made the landing claim especially hard to dismiss was the consistency of the witness account. Zamora repeated the same core sequence over time, and the details never seemed to grow more dramatic than they had to be. He was not describing a grand encounter or a message from the sky. He was describing a sudden, close-range event in ordinary daylight, which is precisely why the case has never felt like a simple campfire story. The most famous detail is the landing site itself, because it seemed to offer a footprint of something that should not have been there. In a case built on testimony, the ground became the silent witness. Supporters of the extraordinary interpretation point to the shape and behavior of the object. Low flight, sudden descent, a pause on the ground, and a rapid vertical departure. That sequence is difficult to fit neatly into the technology of the time. The reported insignia also lingers in the story, because it suggests intention rather than random light. Even now, that small mark feels like a fragment of design from a machine built with purpose, not chance. Another reason the case endures is the emotional texture of Zamora's account. He sounded startled but not theatrical, and that combination can make a witness seem more believable than someone eager to impress. The local community reacted quickly because a police officer had put his reputation on the line. In a small town, that kind of claim does not stay abstract for long. It becomes part of the air people breathe. Soon the case drew national attention, and the landing became one of the most discussed incidents in modern UFO history. It was no longer just a roadside report. It had become a test of how seriously strange testimony should be taken. That attention also brought scrutiny, and scrutiny is where mysteries either sharpen or fade. Investigators and later researchers kept returning to the same question: what exactly did the officer see, and what exactly touched the ground? The strongest believer case rests on the combination of witness credibility, physical traces, and the apparent behavior of the object. Taken together, those pieces create a picture that feels more like an encounter than a misread light. Still, the alternative readings deserve space. Some researchers have suggested a test vehicle, a misperceived aircraft, or a sequence of natural and human-made effects that looked stranger in the moment than they later appeared. The desert can distort distance, sound, and scale, especially in heat and glare. A brief glimpse, followed by shock and motion, can leave even a careful observer with a memory that is vivid but difficult to reconstruct perfectly. That possibility does not erase the landing traces, but it does remind us how quickly the eye can be challenged. In cases like this, perception and physical evidence do not always line up in a tidy way. What remains difficult to settle is the timing. The reported sequence from sighting to landing to departure was so fast that it leaves little room for certainty, yet enough room for wonder to survive. There is also the matter of the sight itself, which seemed to show more than a passing vehicle or a random fire. The impressions, scorch marks, and disturbed brush form a pattern that still invites close study. For many researchers, the case's power comes from its restraint. If the report had been filled with elaborate messages or impossible drama, it might have felt easier to dismiss. Instead, it stays stubbornly concrete. That concreteness is why the story never fully drains away. A police officer, a landing site, a sudden ascent, and a witness who seemed genuinely shaken by what he saw, those elements still hold together with unusual force. Yet the record is not complete, and that incompleteness is part of the unease. We do not have a clear photograph of the craft on the ground, nor a final explanation that satisfies every detail at once. That is why the Zamora case still matters decades later. It sits at the edge of certainty, where a disciplined witness, a physical sight, and a vanishing object all point towards something larger than a roadside mistake. The conventional explanations remain possible, and they deserve to be considered carefully. But they do not fully dissolve the strangeness of a landing reported in broad daylight by a trained officer on an empty New Mexico road. So the case ends where it began, with a place, a witness, and a question that still feels alive. What landed in the desert that afternoon, and why did it leave behind evidence that refuses to sit quietly in the past? For some, the answer may be hidden in the limits of perception and the pressures of the moment. For others, the Zamora incident remains one of those rare cases where the world seems to have briefly revealed a secret, then sealed it away again.